Hey guys, so today's day 13 in the Burning Heart contract. She made an awesome statement about, well, it starts off where she was trying to do a meeting, and the meeting place that was allotted was like a whole bunch of alcohol, and she was trying to do a meeting with like talking about sexual purity, also not drinking because she had been an alcoholic as well. But she said that like after she had changed from her life, her old life, like nailed herself on the cross basically, and they gave her life to Christ, like everything had changed, and now she's back to facing the reality that she was rescued from, which was terrifying, of course. But she goes to say that the Bible does not say do not drink, but it does say in Proverbs, wine is a mocker and beer is a brawler. Like alcohol causes, can't, it's, whenever we drink alcohol or whenever, yeah, it opens opportunities for other things to come in, and therefore, like purity for her was a big stance. And the same thing with sex. So, like, alcohol and sex seem to just kind of go hand in hand. Whenever we have, like, become loose with ourselves, then we have the opportunity to really become loose with ourselves. It's more difficult to maintain that sort of self control, if that makes sense. And then, either way, she was having a struggle with it, and it turns out that her team had actually supported her in it. None of them drank while she was doing this meeting, and it was a really beautiful thing. And then we're going to get into Leviticus, because this was a really good one, man. Leviticus 24, 1 through 25, 46. So the first part says, command the people of Israel to bring pure oil of pressed olives. I want you to take note of that. To keep the lamps burning continuously. And just remember pressed olives because it takes that to refine oneself. And then it goes on to talk about like the laws and regulations and how we can better serve God. But then also like it talks about how with working with the impoverished and working with the disabled and stuff like that, there is a grace period, a year of Jubilee, where all debts are forgiven, which is a wonderful thing because it helps. It's like a full reset for everybody, for the land that it's called to do. Like even in the seventh year, the land was called to rest. But then also he was saying that he would provide the food, even though the land is rusting, and you didn't need to do anything for it. Like God still provided in these times of rest, which is a beautiful thing, I thought. And then it also goes into like how you sell the land and whatnot, and like how that still like coincides with the year of Jubilee and like the reset as well. And then in Mark 10:13 through 31, this is great. Jesus's disciples were like, oh, we can't have the parents like sending out the kids over here because Jesus is busy. And Jesus is like, yo, no, I want the children to come to me. If you don't come to me like a child, you can't get in, kind of thing. Like, no adults allowed. And it's great though because Jesus wants us to be open-hearted, to be willing, ready, and able to do what it takes to get there, just as a child would. To be humble and curious, and to actually, like, it's not about the child, it's not about ego. The children are, they're blessings, but then they're also pure. Their intentions are pure, and that was what Jesus was wanting from these people. And then, right after that, because Jesus was like, why do you call me good? Only God is good. He's obviously getting annoyed with his disciples, which I just thought was beautiful. But it wasn't that he was annoyed and like angry towards them. It was that he was getting frustrated for us because he was like, "Why do I have to be with you still? Like, do I really? Is this really happening?" Like, 'cause he wasn't upset with it. He was just noticing that it was a bigger struggle for us than it really could have been, and it should have been. Basically, I'm not gonna shit on ourselves, but it was unnecessarily had to be repeated, which I still find beautiful because this life is for us and Jesus. Our servitude for God is for us, and that is what makes it blissful to me. And then a man goes in there to Jesus. He's like, "Hey, what do I got to do to be a part of this kingdom too?" Because Jesus is like, "Yo, just follow all the laws of the land and of God," which was pretty much like what Leviticus was saying. And this man obviously seemed to be very known about this. And then he was like, oh, great then. Just now all you got to do is just sell your possessions and give to the poor and the needy. And then the man's face fell flat. because I'm just gonna assume he had like a lot of possessions. He didn't want to give. Like he was abiding by the rules, but he didn't want to abide wholeheartedly, and that sucks. But he it took me back to Leviticus 18 or verse 18. Where is it? If you want to live securely in the land, follow my decrees and obey my regulations. So the man was already following the decrees and regulations. Like, he thought that he had it made. He was going to be all like, oh yeah, watch me do this in front of everybody. And no, Jesus was like, look, you got to do this. You got to give it wholeheartedly. Your entirety. Jesus and God want the entirety of us. Not just that partial part, not just to be like, to put on a show. He wants all of our lives. So this way, once we give all of our lives and they are dedicated to Him, we will just exponentially grow together, and that is what makes this life beautiful. And then Jesus also goes on to saying, humanly speaking, it's impossible, but with God everything is possible. 29, Jesus replied, I assure you that everyone who has given up a house or sisters, anyone who sacrificed something important for them, like, if something dies and we give it back to God because it was God's in the first place. Everybody that abides by that, that is how you do it, basically. How to enter the kingdom, because it's not about us anymore. It is about God. And if we're willing to do this, because we're going to go kicking and screaming either way, or we're going to go just willing and able and gracefully. So which do you choose? And then he said, but he also goes on to say in verse 31, but many who are the greatest now will be least important then. And those who seem to least important now will be the greatest then. That's why Jesus calls us to be servants with our whole hearts. Not just a little bit, not just like, oh, I did all these rules and regulations, so I deserve this. No, he wants our whole hearts. And then in Psalms 44, 9 through 26, this is great too, because it's the people were, which also took me back to the pressed as olives, because the people were saying like, hey, we're facing all this turmoil and stuff, but then they're like, why do you, in verse 24, why do you look the other way? Why do you ignore our suffering and oppression? We collapse in the dust, lying in the face of the dirt. Rise up and help us, ransom us because of your unfailing love. They still knew, though they were being pressed as olives, they still clung to that because God was still working in the meantime. I understand where they're coming from, number one. I've been there with the oppression and like people constantly beating you and like just torture and stuff like that, and not knowing where to turn, having nowhere to turn. But knowing, within a deep knowing, that God is still there. We must cling to the truth that He is always working on us, no matter what it looks like. But it reminded me a lot of the oppressed, like the olives in Leviticus 24 too, though. But they're also returning, just like the other Psalms I was reading yesterday and the day before. They return because they know. So they'll be like in despair, but then they'll be like, wait a minute, no. We have to sit here. God is doing something else in the background. Who knows what kind of blessings He was creating for these people because they were willing to sacrifice, because they were willing to stay obedient. And that's what He's calling us to do now. And then in Proverbs 10, 20 through 21, this is awesome. The words of the godly are like sterling silver. I'm just going to say something too with that, because sterling silver, you can see your reflection. And you can also like, not manipulate it, but you can fix whatever needs to be fixed. You can like put on makeup or deep comb your hair, like I didn't do this morning yet because I was so excited after this. The heart of a fool is worthless. Jesus is always looking at our hearts. Jesus always wants our whole hearts. And then verse 21, the words of the godly encourage many. We're here to encourage people, let's go. But fools are destroyed by their lack of common sense. That's kind of self-explanatory. Either way, much love, one love, because I have like a little bit of time left. I love you guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm so glad I got over this within like 10 minutes. Bye.